Right then, let's see. Email. Here we go. Okay, what do we got? Meet singles now. Business opportunity from a Nigerian prince. Letter from Tom Vasel. Herbal Viagra. Wait. Letter from Tom Vasel? Hey YouTube, I'm Addy, welcome to Gaming Indoors. Now, normally when I start an interview, it's with a game designer. This time, however, I'm not doing that. I'm instead speaking to a game reviewer. Some would say the game reviewer, Tom Vasel. And now, before I start though, I do want to say a quick thank you because I think I owe a thank you to Spencer Palmer. Spencer, I think your comment, you made a comment on a video I made about game descriptions, and I think you said you were going to reach out to Tom, and I think it's because of that Tom got in touch with me and agreed to have this conversation. Now, I just want to call out that the video you commented on was about game descriptions. It was about a better way of describing board games, something that I'm still quite interested and passionate, in fact, passionate about, something I'm still investigating, and I've got a couple of ideas about what I want to do on that subject further. Bizarrely, we didn't cover that at all in this interview, so I owe you an apology as well as a big thank you. Anyway, for the rest of us though, it's still worth sticking around because in today's interview, you're going to learn exactly what Tom thinks of Reddit. You're going to hear about what Tom thinks about Kickstarter, whether it's good or bad for the hobby. And most importantly, you're going to hear about what Tom thinks the most undervalued theme in board games today currently is. If you like hearing about modern board games or want tips about designing your own games, then please do give this video a thumbs up. Perhaps even consider subscribing to the channel if you want more of this content, because I'll be producing new stuff each week. So if you've been into board gaming in any shape or form over the last 10 years, then the chances are you already know who Tom Vasel is, of course. But me being a methodical kind of guy, I really wanted to stick to form in my interview process. So I asked the same question I always open my interviews with, which was, who exactly was Tom Vasel and what right did he have to talk about board games?
I'm a human being. Everyone should be able to talk about board games. So I did one day, and I haven't stopped. I review board games at the Dice Tower. I used to do written reviews. Now I do video and podcast-filled reviews, and I've reviewed a few games. I don't think I'm at 10,000 yet, but I'm getting there.
Now, I don't know about you, but I've always found the board game hobby to be the realm of the geeky and the nerdy on the whole. I wanted to know whether Tom felt the same and whether we should be trying to make the hobby a little bit more inclusive to those that aren't necessarily board gamers per se.
On one hand, I think that what you're saying doesn't happen quite as much anymore. Board games are getting into the public consciousness from people talking about Catan and Ticket to Ride and making the newspaper and things like that. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is, on one hand, I go, I don't. It's not my job to educate the world on board games. I can't really. If I meet someone and I say I review board games, and they're like, okay, and that's about the extent. I don't feel like I need to convert them to that any more than if I meet someone who loves to fish and I don't want to go fishing and they're going to persuade me how good fishing is. I don't want to hear it. I accept that you have that hobby. And not everyone is a board gamer. I know that some people it's anathema to. It's just not everyone. There's a board game for everyone to play maybe, but not everyone's a board gamer. That being said, can we make gaming more accessible? Oh my word, yes. It's like it's different things, right? There's obviously a lot of gatekeeping that's been in the hobby. Some of it's by just very nature, like a very select group of people play games and we need to open that group up so more can join. The games themselves appeal to certain demographics and that should be widened to appeal to everybody. But like I said, that's like a whole hour's question in a sense. I had a friend who went to Origins. He said the first year and there was one woman. Now there's a lot more. It's still not 50-50. I don't know if it ever will be. I don't know that I care if it's ever 50-50 of anything, right? I just don't want it to be exclusionary of things. And I know that in the past, when I was in college, for example, and I was dating my now wife, and I went to the game store, I didn't want to take her in there sometimes because it was embarrassing. The posters on the wall, the way people would act and talk. I was like, you don't want to, I was embarrassed for my hobby. I don't think we should have to be that way. So I think when it comes to females being in hobby, sure, there's definitely a lot of work can still be done in that regard, but it's started at least. The most popular designer of last year is a female designer. And hopefully we'll see more folks follow in her footsteps. Now, as there are other groups, there's definitely the board gaming hobbies, at least in America anyway, is fairly white. So that needs to be opened up more. And it's a tough conversation. And I'll be honest, it's one I did not think about much 20 years ago, but it's something that comes to mind. So here's an example. So I designed or co-designed a game called Nothing Personal. So Nothing Personal, we put all these mobsters in there. And I said, well, we want to stay true to the mobster thing. Mobsters are Italian, and mostly men. So I'm not trying to be misogynist or racist here, but that's just what's put into the game. But at the end of the day, it's a made up silly game. So who really cares? I could have added all that stuff in, but I was like, well, I must be, is it that big of a deal? Well, it's not that big of a deal, but people want to see themselves in gaming. And I noticed this with my daughters. We'll play a game and there's one female character out of 5. So they all fight to be that character. And they're like, why is there only one? I'm like, I don't know. Why didn't this company make it so you could flip all the characters over and it's male on one side, female on the other? But the same could be said for race or height or anything, right? Why is there not more diversity? I have never had a problem finding a character that looks like me in a board game, but other people do, and that makes it difficult. But I'm seeing companies make many steps in this direction too.
If you're a designer or even a budding designer, then I think that last segment was gold. People want to see themselves in the games that they play. And I think it's up to us to be able to create games that have an inclusion and diverse characters, or inclusive and diverse characters in the game that we produce. This will not only ensure that your player base is really involved in the game, it will add to a sense of enjoyment and actually make our hobby that much more accessible to everyone. Well, there's the hope anyway. Now, I wanted to know a little bit more from Tom about what he thought the current targeting of games was aimed at. That's a terrible way of putting that sentence. What I was asking there was who was the target audience in his view for most of the games that are being produced now. Again, I'm relying on Tom's experience here to tell me what he's seeing is happening out there so that I can learn from it and better understand what perhaps I should be looking at or considering at least when I create my own games.
It seems like most board games are made for those between 30 and 50, right? It's definitely or 60 or whatever. It's definitely I would argue that board games often appeal even to middle age, middle class or upper class for whatever reason. Some of that's economics of being able to afford board games, but it just seems to be that way. White collar people, a lot of times, that seems to be the general thing. Of course, it's not always true. There's always differences, but yeah, that seems to be that way. And I think part of that is the people who promote it. So if you watch my channel, I'm 43 and I talk about games. My kids think that's super boring because that's me. So kids their age are likely to think the same thing. So if I want to have more people watch my channel in that regard, I would probably need to find younger hosts to appeal to them. I've been working hard to diversify my channel as much as possible. Age is one of the ones that I think it's harder to do.
Now, I don't know about you, but there seems to me that there's a lot more emphasis on producing games that are aimed at the casual gamer, or even, dare I say it, the non-board gamer. I wanted to know whether Tom felt that was true and whether this was a sign of things to come.
It's kind of a mix, yes. So Wingspan's a great example of that. Wingspan is a game that it's not a geeky game by any stretch of the imagination. It's about birds. Although I always have the opinion that everything's geeky. It just depends what you are. The people who sit there every week and fill out their fantasy sports things and do all the stats are just as geeky as a Dungeon and Dragon. And the guy who sit there and talk about hunting and driving a boat out in the Florida Everglades near me is geeky too, just in a different way. That being said, the stuff that when you said, you and I, when we grew up, these traditional geek things, we felt almost enclosed, right? There wasn't many people who did it, but that has really changed. I have 6 daughters, and every single one of them loves something that we consider geeky, whether it's superheroes or fantasy, and they love all that stuff, and they love playing video games, and my sisters never touched that stuff. They were never interested in that stuff, but that stuff's more open now. It's like there's no longer this stigma. The highest rated or highest watched movies in the world are superhero movies. And so that's kind of come full circle. So yes, those geeky things may not appeal to the masses years ago, but there is mass appeal to playing a superhero game now. But it doesn't appeal to everybody, and that's why I'm glad games like Wingspan exist, and games like, that might be more mundane, like Ticket to Ride, they exist.
So the hobby's becoming more inclusive as every day passes. That's great news, of course. I wanted to really push that, though, and ask whether or not Tom thought we could ever reach the levels of maturity and inclusion that something like esports. Could there be a stadium where one day everyone's staring at 2 people or 4 people even playing Catan, say?
I don't think so. I mean, I think board games will get bigger. It's certainly going to grow, especially in a time frame like now with the virus and stuff. Board gaming will probably grow some. Will it ever reach the heights of video games? I don't think so. But at the same time, I guess I'm okay with it not. There's millions of people who play board games now. That's awesome. I know at the end of the day, when people want the hobby to get bigger, it's all from a selfish perspective. I want the hobby to get bigger so that I have more people to play games with.
Yeah.
I want the hobby to get bigger so that more games are published that I like. I want the hobby to get bigger so that board games become cheaper. Maybe there's some people who are altruistic, like, I just want the world to play a board game, and drink a Coke.
Right.
Maybe. But at the end of the day, it's more, hey, I want it to be bigger, so it makes it better for me. But it is pretty good. You can buy really good games at major chains that you could not used to do. Online has made it possible for us to get games from any country on earth. We are able to communicate with a gaming community that we were never able to do before. We have things like Zoom and Skype and online ways to communicate with people and iPads and computers. We have so much that it's just out there. Even if it would be super niche, it doesn't matter because we can find those that we can play against.
Now, Tom has more exposure to games than I probably ever will do. I wanted to understand from him what the current trends were and how he kept up to date with what was going on in the world of board gaming.
I just gauge the internet. I try my best. At the end of the day, I'm going to play a game that interests me. I don't care if no one else is interested in it or not. But I have a pretty good feeling of what people are interested in hearing about and talking about. And so I will. I every day I spend a good chunk of time on the internet, keeping an eye on what games come out and where they are and stuff and what people are interested in. And I try to review the quote unquote hot games.
So Reddit then?
I use Reddit as a kind of gauge. Reddit is a very, very here today, gone tomorrow type atmosphere. And Reddit tends to trend negative. If you are ever feeling really good about yourself, then what I recommend, and to the point where you're feeling egotistical, then you should go on Reddit and tell people something good about you. And what that will do is it will bring you back down to earth and you will be humbled immediately.
Yikes.
That being said, there's a lot of good on Reddit.
Okay, I just want to reiterate once again, if you didn't pick it up from my really bad edit there, Tom did stress that there were plenty of very positive things out there on the board game community on Reddit too. Anyway, moving forward, what about Cthulhu, I said? What about if I'm a new designer and I want to find a theme that I think is going to be well recognized, well accepted? What about good old Cthulhu? What was his thoughts on just sticking with something that was tried and tested?
I think that might be on the downward trend. We'll see.
Oh, really?
We'll see. What's interesting about Cthulhu is part of the reasons Cthulhu's always been somewhat popular, right? But it's also public domain.
Yeah.
So as more and more works move into public domain, I'm really curious to see what happens when some of these other things. This is one of the things I've been keeping an eye on because of the United States in particular, their copyright laws. They kept getting moved back. It was mostly pushed by Disney to keep making the years longer. Well, that finally stopped. And will we see some of these other things come? Sherlock Holmes, for example, recently went into public domain, and you can tell there's many, many games about Sherlock Holmes. And I think that's why Cthulhu is out there. There's always going to be trends in the industry, especially if a game is extremely popular. People will try to copy it. So they will copy how the game works. And then they also will look maybe to the theme. Right now, there's a lot of pirate games for whatever reason. There's a lot of intellectual property games based on movies and TV shows. But then mechanic-wise, there's a lot of roll and write games like Yahtzee, where you roll dice and write things down. And so I feel like we just watch different trends happen. There's a lot of games currently that use polyominoes, like Tetris shapes to put on boards. That's really clicked with people. A lot of them have sold well, so people try to copy it.
So do I just completely ignore trend altogether then and not worry about trends for themes at least?
I could play a game with no theme and have no problem. As soon as we are done with this interview, I'm going to play a game that has amazing theme that I can't talk to you about, but it's amazing. There's a game, you were talking about pirates. There's a game called Forgotten Waters that's out. I don't know if that's the pirate game you were talking about. But that game is all theme and I love it. But I also like a game that could just be abstract. I try to be an omni gamer. I do have trends in things I like, but it doesn't have to do with the theme or not theme usually. There are some themes I'm not interested in as much, and there are some themes that get me more excited. If there's food in the game, I'm on board. If it has to do with ice cream or burgers or pizza or salad or what, I don't care what the food is. I just find food to be a fascinating subject. I am mind-boggled that there's not more games based on food. Now, people, whenever they say that, like, haha, Fat Tom liking food. But here's the thing. The world revolves around food. It really does. It's not an American thing. Every culture I've been in, food is a major thing. Households will spend a good chunk of their day preparing food. People go out and get food. People talk about food. There's restaurants is one of the biggest businesses in the world where restaurants everywhere. So why are there not more games about food? There should be. It is the universal thing. No one ever says, I hate food.
Well, folks, you heard it here first. If you want a rave review for your board or card game, then make sure it's food themed, because Tom Vasel absolutely loves that as an idea. Now, moving forward, Tom has, of course, as I said before, exposure to hundreds and hundreds of games per year, and usually has his finger on the pulse. But I did want to know whether he'd ever been caught out by a trend, whether there was a new set of mechanics that were emerging or a new theme that was emerging that he just wasn't aware of.
That happens occasionally. I really do try to keep up with trends to the point where I look every year and say, this game a lot of people said was really good. I didn't touch it, but I can't see everything. No. And so I've made peace in my heart that I will not play every game. That's fine.
Okay.
That being said, I try to go into games with as little information as I can because I want to feel that new fun experience of discovering it for the first time. And I can still play a game and feel joy at just how entertaining that game is. And when I lose that, then I'll look for another job.
Okay, it's a terrible segue, I know, but I moved the subject on to Kickstarter because here was my opportunity to speak with someone who has seen plenty of games coming through that mechanism. I asked whether or not Kickstarter, which started off as a trend and is now really a staple way of getting board games out to the community, I wanted to know whether Tom thought it was a good thing or a bad thing for our hobby.
If you made a balance sheet of all the good things about Kickstarter and all the bad things about Kickstarter, the good things definitely outweigh the bad things. There's definitely problems with the system, and there's definitely a shift in the paradigm of how people buy games and do things. But for the hobby itself, I think it has been mostly a good thing. There's possibilities of fraud and people doing things. There's sometimes an emphasis on the outward appearance of a game rather than the game itself. One of the problems that we have currently is that the onus is now on a consumer there's a push for them to buy a game sight unseen, hoping it's good. And there's also, it tends to be a fairly materialistic push, like get this, with the 600 stretch goals and all this extra stuff. All you need to do is pay $200 and you will get a box the size of a grand piano full of game pieces and toys that you will never play with, but you will feel superior to other people who did not. Now, I know that's a satirical and a general oversimplification, but it really is the case. And that's a different model. It used to be the game was published and people would go play the game and then talk about it and review it. You would say, well, maybe I should get it, maybe I shouldn't, or maybe you could even play it. But now people are being pushed into this and saying, if you don't buy it now, you'll never get it. And so that whole fear of missing out, that FOMO idea, I don't think that's necessarily good for the hobby. But again, that's a part of Kickstarter, not the whole thing.
Okay, but was Kickstarter a threat to board game publishers?
It's not publisher versus Kickstarter. It's, will you publish through Kickstarter or traditionally? And if I'm a publisher, I can't think why I wouldn't use Kickstarter. Kickstarter lets you gauge interest for a game. We now live in a society where there's 5,000 to 6,000 games coming out a year. Many of those games don't sell a lot. It would be nice for me to know that before I printed 20,000 copies, that people weren't going to buy 20,000. If I see in a Kickstarter that people aren't interested, no harm, no loss, I'm done.
Having spoken about publishers, it triggered a thought about online gaming. You see, nowadays, lots of publishers are putting their board games out online as well as online games. Places like Tabletopia, for example, are doing incredibly well, especially during the lockdown, of course. I wanted to know from Tom what his thoughts were about online board games and whether they had a rightful place in our hobby.
Sure, but it's a growing trend by necessity. I'm curious to see how much it will last once this is over. Some things work really well. I run a werewolf group where we play through Zoom. That's fantastic. I love doing that. And I think role-playing games also work really well through Zoom. But when I play other games, I'm playing a lot more games on my iPad now, and I like doing that. But Tabletop Simulator and Tabletopia, while they're fine, they're very useful for what they do, I am hesitant because they're still not as easy. So if I'm playing Tabletop Simulator and I want to look at a card you just did, it's the equivalent, if we were in person, of me doing this. What do you have? But in reality, I would just tilt my eyes a little like this.
Yeah.
But it's different when you're playing online. It's just not as easy. Now, if you play a game that's built into online, like that's why I like playing on the iPad, where they do all the bookkeeping for you, then it's actually sometimes a superior experience. But you know what? No matter what, for me at least, and I know for a lot of people, I just like to hang out with human beings in person. And so while online gaming is good, and it's definitely on the rise by necessity right now, and I think it will still rise a little even when we can all get back together, at the end of the day, I will never pick it over meeting people in person.
Speaking to someone who sees hundreds of games, it was an opportune moment to ask about the future and ask Tom specifically about any games he was looking forward to for the rest of the year. It hasn't been the greatest of years, of course, but for board games, things were still being produced, and in fact, probably, I suspect, more board games were being played. So I was quite keen to understand if there were any designers he was looking towards as good examples of people who really produced great games or great mechanics that we, as budding designers, could learn from. What he gave me as a response I thought was really well thought out and actually spot on.
I get asked this a lot, actually, and I don't normally have an answer for this. And let me explain why. I'm a big fan. I know people love this. We do our top 10s on our channel, and our number one list is upcoming games from 2020, right? It's what people like to hear about. But I'm like, why are we always talking about games that are coming out when there are literally games, thousands and thousands of them that you can get right now? I call it the cult of the future. You know, someone gets a game in the mail, they're like, oh, that's really cool. Oh, but what could I get next month? So I actually don't know off the top of my head about stuff coming in the future. I know a little bit, but I always concentrate on what is out now. Now, granted, sometimes the stuff I have is not out yet. I have it early, but it still is what I have now. So I really enjoyed the new Marvel United game from Come On. I really had fun with that. I mentioned Forgotten Waters, really great piratey themed game. That's been a lot of fun. High Rise from Gil Hova about building towers. I've really been enjoying that one. The new Back to the Future, Back in Time by Prospero Hall. That one I really enjoy.
Okay, folks, I'm coming to the end of my interview time with Tom, and even after editing, I've tried to reduce this as much as I possibly could. We spoke for about 45 minutes on a whole variety of subjects. It was amazing speaking with him, but true to form, I wanted to end this conversation as I end all my conversations with the game designers I speak to, and this is the first time I've spoken to someone who actually reviews games, specifically almost as a career, I'd say. I wanted to ask the same old, which was, if you could give one piece of advice to a budding designer, what would it be?
Man, there's a lot of things. I would just say, play games. If you're a budding game designer, sometimes I've seen game designers get so caught up in their design. The designers that I like the best are designers who love playing games. They're constantly talking about playing new games, having a good time. I could list many different designers, Emerson Matsuuchi, Richard Launius, who, will sit down and they will have a blast playing a game with me that's not their own game. And it's fine because they just love games. And I've met some designers who I'm not sure love games, and they design good games. That's fine. But the more you play, the better you'll be as a game designer. I think you really will be. The more you expand your knowledge. So play games and enjoy the hobby, because if you're not enjoying it, why would you do it?
Well, folks, that was my interview over with Tom Vasel. It's been immensely enjoyable in creating and speaking with Tom. Tom, I want to give you a heartfelt thanks for taking time out to speak with me. It was really, really kind of you to first reach out by email and then agree to actually speak with me as well. I really appreciate it. Now, Tom does a bunch of things. He does a podcast. He does a YouTube channel, of course, The Dice Tower. Everyone knows about The Dice Tower. If you don't, I'm going to put links in below. Tom did not mention this at all during the interview, but I'm going to mention it. He also runs a foundation, a charity, which I think is a really good cause. I'm going to put links to that foundation in there as well, because I think it's a worthwhile cause, and it's something that you perhaps, if you are able to help out with, it would be great and awesome. Now, enough all this. I should really just stress one other thing. I do this kind of stuff, the interviews with people and reaching out and making a fool of myself by trying to reach out with people, because I really do think that the audience watching it will benefit, just like I benefit. So if you find this informative, inspirational, or even entertaining, then please subscribe if you haven't done so. Click the like button, hit that notification bell so you get to be aware of the next video as it comes out, and there usually is a video coming out every week. Once the housework has settled down, I'm getting some renovation done. Once that's settled down, I will try to endeavor to return to 2 times a week, but at the moment it's once a week. Anyway, enough of me rambling on about. Next week we're going to be carry on the journey of board game design. I might do a little pit stop into the world of miniature painting as well, because I haven't done that for a while and I need to get back into it. Oh my God, gaming indoors, there's so much stuff to do. Don't even get me started about video gaming. I'm about to get back into WoW, by the way. If you're out there playing WoW, let me know in the comments below, because if you're on Thunderhorn, I'm going to be jumping on there ready for Shadowlands. I digress. Anyway, for now, guys, look after yourselves.